In 1936, a satirical sports writer looked at the college football landscape and decided to make a point. If we're going to crown champions based on who beat whom, he argued, then the rightful national champion was Slippery Rock College of Pennsylvania. His logic was airtight. Slippery Rock beat Westminster. Westminster beat West Virginia Wesleyan. West Virginia Wesleyan beat Duquesne. Duquesne upset Pitt. Pitt destroyed Notre Dame. Notre Dame beat Northwestern. And Northwestern beat Minnesota, the team that the Associated Press had just crowned as the best in America. By the transitive property, Slippery Rock was your 1936 national champion. The joke spread. Other small Pennsylvania schools made their own claims through similar chains of victories. St. Vincent College, Indiana State Teachers College, St. Thomas, each had a path, however winding, to the throne. It was absurd. It was meant to be absurd. The joke was absurd, but it mirrored a reality that was even stranger. This is the story of how we've been selecting college football national champions throughout its history. Even now with the playoff. Are we sure we've solved this equation? In 1936, college football had been played for nearly 70 years, and nobody had ever figured out a legitimate way to decide who was best. Before the AP poll existed, national championships were awarded the same way you might decide which of your uncles tells the best stories at Thanksgiving. Somebody picked. A football historian named Parke Davis sat at his desk in the early 1930s and decided he would fix this problem. He went through the record books year by year, all the way back to 1869, and declared champions for seasons that had ended decades earlier. Players who had long since died learned posthumously that they were national champions. Davis selected 94 teams across 61 seasons. He had a heavy Eastern bias, largely ignoring the South and West Coast. For 21 of his selections, he was the only person who ever chose that team, and yet schools still cite his work today when claiming championships. Princeton uses him. Yale uses him. If Parke Davis said you were a champion in 1903, well, who's going to argue? Everyone who played in those games are dead. This was the system. This was always the system. Somebody somewhere with enough credibility or enough ink simply declared it to be. To understand why crowning a champion was so difficult, you have to understand what college football looked like before the Second World War. There were no charter flights. There were no team buses rolling down interstate highways. If your team wanted to play someone 500 miles away, you were looking at a multi-day train trip, missed classes, and expenses that most athletic departments could not justify. So teams played who was nearby. Yale played Harvard and Princeton. Michigan played Minnesota and Wisconsin. Alabama played Auburn and Tennessee. The schedules were regional by necessity, which meant a team from the East might go an entire decade without facing a team from the South or Midwest. How do you compare an undefeated Yale squad to an undefeated Texas squad when they have never played a common opponent and never will? You can't. You just guess. This is how the big programs built their resumes. Schools with resources scheduled games against smaller regional colleges. A powerhouse might play 8 games and face maybe 2 legitimate opponents. The rest were local teachers' colleges, military academies, or tiny religious schools happy to take a beating in exchange for a payday. An undefeated record sounded impressive until you looked at who was actually on the schedule. The bowl games were supposed to help with this. The Rose Bowl was designed to bring together champions from different regions for a true intersectional matchup, but most powerful programs refused to participate. They had undefeated records. They had their regional bragging rights. Why risk that against some team from California they'd never heard of? So the sport remained balkanized. East Coast writers voted for East Coast teams. Midwestern writers voted for Midwestern teams. When Parke Davis sat down to retroactively crown champions, he was trying to impose order on decades of chaos. He was guessing, just like everyone else. He just happened to write it down. The Associated Press launched its college football poll in 1936. 35 sports writers would vote each week, ranking the 10 best teams in America. Points would be tallied. A final poll would crown a champion. Order from chaos. Democracy in action. There was just one small problem. The final poll came out before the bowl games. This seems insane now, the biggest games of the season, the only chance for teams from different regions to actually play each other, and the championship was already decided before kickoff. But there was a reason, and that reason had everything to do with power. Notre Dame did not play in bowl games. The Big Ten did not play in bowl games. These were the giants of college football, and they viewed postseason exhibitions as commercial vulgarity. Bowl games were for the Southern schools, the West Coast programs, the have-nots looking for a payday and a vacation. The Eastern establishment wanted no part of it, so the AP accommodated them. Crown the champion before Christmas, and Notre Dame never has to worry about some Rose Bowl result muddying the waters. It was a system designed to protect the powerful, disguised as a system designed to provide clarity. And it worked more or less for about 14 years, until 1950, when the coaches decided they wanted to vote too. United Press International launched the Coaches Poll in 1950. Now America had two authorities declaring champions, two popes, two sources of truth, and for exactly 4 years, they agreed with each other. Then came 1954. Ohio State went undefeated. UCLA went undefeated. The AP writers chose Ohio State. The coaches chose UCLA. And because of a Big Ten rule preventing teams from appearing in consecutive Rose Bowls, UCLA could not play Ohio State to settle it on the field. Neither fan base was satisfied. Both were technically correct. This would become a pattern. By 1964, the situation had devolved into farce. Alabama was crowned by the AP after an undefeated regular season, but then lost to Texas in the Orange Bowl. Arkansas finished as the only undefeated team after the Bowls and was crowned by the Football Writers Association of America. Notre Dame, at 9-1, was given a championship by the National Football Foundation. 3 champions for one season. Nobody was happy, but everybody had a trophy. It was around this time the schools began to realize something important. If you looked hard enough, you could find someone, somewhere, who had declared you a national champion. And thus began the great championship inflation. Let's talk about Alabama. The Crimson Tide currently claim 18 national championships. This requires some creative accounting. Their 1941 claim comes from a selector called the Holgate system. Alabama went 9-2 that year. They finished 20th in the AP poll. But Holgate said they were champions, and a trophy case in Tuscaloosa agrees. Now, to be fair, Alabama is not the only school that plays this game, but they are far and away the most aggressive. Consider the contrast. Penn State could claim 1969 and 1994 based on undefeated seasons and various selectors. They don't. Nebraska could claim 7 more titles from the early 1900s based on the same selectors Alabama uses. They don't. Michigan has about 6 unclaimed championships from selectors they've chosen not to recognize. Ohio State leaves titles on the table. These programs have decided that claiming championships nobody remembers you winning is not worth the asterisk. Alabama has made a different calculation. If someone somewhere at some point said you were the best, you put up a banner. You tell recruits about your 18 championships and let them assume those are all legitimate. It is, in its way, a form of genius. The incentive structure rewards aggression. Alabama understood this before anyone else, and they have exploited it more thoroughly than anyone else. A communications staffer named Wayne Atchison deserves some credit here. In 1984, he was digging through old scrapbooks looking for statistics for the media guide. He found selectors who had named Alabama champion in years they didn't officially claim. Without asking anyone, he changed the guide from 6 titles to 11. And I never thought a thing about it, he later said. The Crimson Tide have been thinking about it ever since. By the 1970s and 80s, the number of organizations claiming authority to crown national champions had exploded. The Helms Athletic Foundation, the National Championship Foundation, the College Football Researchers Association, Sagarin, Massey, Cawley, Billingsley. Billingsley. Let's talk about Richard Billingsley. The Billingsley Report was one of the computer polls used in the Bowl Championship Series formula. It was treated as a legitimate mathematical system for determining the best team in college football. Its creator, Richard Billingsley, was born around 1951 in Hugo, Oklahoma. He attended Texas Bible College. He became a minister. He later worked as a consultant in the country music business. He started rating football teams as a hobby in 1968. He has no mathematical training. He has no statistical background. He built a formula because he loved college football and thought he could do it better than the people who were doing it. And for over a decade, his opinions helped determine who played for the national championship. Billingsley also went back through history and retroactively selected champions for every season since 1869. His selections are now listed in the official NCAA records book. Schools cite them when claiming titles. Richard Billingsley, country music consultant, has shaped how we understand 130 years of college football history. This is the system. This has always been the system. Somebody somewhere with enough confidence or enough persistence makes a declaration and that becomes the way it is. Think about today's college football playoff committee. They don't give explanations. They just tell us the rankings, and we don't have a choice but to accept them. The year was 1984, and the college football establishment was about to have a collective nervous breakdown. The cause? An unheralded team from the Western Athletic Conference, Brigham Young University. The Cougars didn't look like champions. They played in a league that the East Coast media dismissed as a mid-major before that term even existed. Their schedule was a collection of regional outposts like New Mexico, Wyoming, and Texas El Paso. Their only quality opponent was Pittsburgh, who started the year ranked third and ended up with a losing record. But as the season wore on, a funny thing happened. BYU kept winning and everyone else kept losing. By November, the traditional powers were stumbling over each other to get out of the way. Oklahoma lost, Nebraska lost, Texas lost. One by one, the Blue Bloods fell, leaving the Cougars as the only undefeated team in America. The reaction from the power brokers wasn't respect. It was pure, unadulterated snobbery. Oklahoma's Barry Switzer led the charge. He didn't just disagree with BYU's ranking, he campaigned against it like a politician. BYU beat its schedule, but it didn't beat the world, he barked. Decades later, at 86 years old, he had softened his stance. He admitted his goal was to be as derogatory as possible because it was in Oklahoma's best interest. Then came the line that would define the era. NBC broadcaster Bryant Gumbel, echoing the sentiment of the big money conferences, dismissed BYU's opponents as a Bo Diddley Tech schedule. It was a masterclass in elitism. The message was clear. It doesn't matter if you win every game on your schedule if we don't think the people you're playing are worthy of being on the same field as us. The Holiday Bowl tried to force a showdown. They practically begged the top 10 team to come to San Diego and settle it. But the elites weren't interested. Washington, Maryland, and Auburn all turned their noses up at the Cougars, opting for more prestigious bowls and bigger paydays. BYU was left to play a 6-5 Michigan team. Even then, the legendary Bo Schembechler openly questioned if the Cougars belonged in the conversation. The game itself was a gritty, ugly masterpiece. BYU's quarterback, Robbie Bosco, was knocked out of the game with a knee injury, only to return heavily taped to lead a fourth-quarter comeback. Despite 5 turnovers, the Cougars found a way to win, 24-17. And when the final polls were released, The unthinkable had happened. BYU was the consensus national champion. It was the first time an outsider had ever crashed the party, but the establishment made sure it would be the last. The threat of a team like BYU winning it all again terrified the big conferences. Behind the scenes, the gears began to turn. The power brokers realized that if they didn't create a system to protect their interest, the Diddley Techs of the world might actually start winning on a regular basis. The Bowl Coalition arrived in 1992, born from the frustration of consecutive split championships in 1990 and 1991. The idea was simple. Get the major conferences and major bowls to work together so that the two top teams would actually play each other. But the systems were only as good as the people running them. And in the early 90s, those people were struggling with the basics, like counting to 4. 1990 proved the blueprint for how a championship could be built on a clerical error. Colorado went 11-1-1, but their entire season rested on a rainy afternoon in Missouri. The chain crew failed to flip the down marker. The referees lost track. Colorado was handed 5 plays at the goal line instead of 4, and they scored on the 5th attempt to win the game. In an era of sportsmanship, everyone expected Colorado Bill McCartney to forfeit or for the Big Eight to intervene. They didn't. McCartney blamed the Missouri turf for his team's struggles and kept the win. When Georgia Tech finished undefeated and claimed the other half of the title, defensive back Ken Swilling didn't talk about the stats or the strength of the schedule. He spoke for the rest of the country. We're the champions. We didn't need 5 downs to beat anybody. The establishment responded to this chaos by forming the Bowl Alliance in 1995, but they still had a blue blood problem. The Big Ten and the Pac-10 refused to join. They had a parade to attend and a Rose Bowl contract to honor. To them, the tradition of the sunset in Pasadena was more important than a unified national champion. This arrogance set the stage for 1997, a year where a championship wasn't won on the field but on a campaign trail. Michigan was the undefeated darling of the AP writers. Nebraska was the undefeated powerhouse of the coaches. After Nebraska dismantled Tennessee in the Orange Bowl, their quarterback Scott Frost did something unprecedented. He took the microphone on national television and essentially cut a campaign ad. Frost pleaded with the coaches to look at the big picture. He was playing on the heartstrings of the voters, knowing that the legendary coach Tom Osborne was retiring. It worked. Somewhere in the secret ballots of the coaches poll, a few voters moved Michigan down to 3rd or 4th just to ensure Osborne went out with a trophy. It wasn't a statistical analysis. It was a parting gift. The sport had spent 60 years building systems, and it still could not figure out how to crown one champion without a scandal or a sympathetic vote getting in the way. I know as a Nebraska guy that our 97 team would have beat the pants off Michigan had they played. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. The Bowl Championship Series launched in 1998 with the promise, we are taking the heart out of the equation. No more retirement gifts for coaches. No more human error on the ballots. Computers would analyze the data, and the formula would spit out a definitive top 2. The BCS worked until the machines started making decisions that no human being could explain. In 2003, USC was the unanimous number 1 in every human poll. They passed the eye test for every living fan. But the BCS computers were looking at something else, a late season game in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Because Boise State beat Hawaii, USC's strength of schedule dropped by a fraction of a percentage. That 0.16 point difference, the weight of a single game between two teams with no stake in the title, bumped USC out of the championship. Pete Carroll was bewildered. The two-pope problem had returned, and this time, one of the popes was a server rack in a basement. The human voters were so disgusted by the computer's choice that they revolted. The AP writers crowned USC anyway, ignoring the championship game entirely. Even three coaches bound by contract to vote for the BCS winner secretly broke their word and voted for USC. The machines hadn't fixed the arguments. They had just made the arguments feel more cold, more distant, and more unfair. The college football playoff arrived in 2014, promising to finally settle things on the field. 4 teams, 3 games, one undisputed champion. It was the solution the sport had been avoiding for a century. And yet, the arguments didn't stop. They simply found a new home. The debate shifted from who is number 1 to who is number 5. The arguments did not stop. They merely shifted. Instead of debating whether the number 1 team should play the number 2 team, people debated whether the number 4 team deserved to be there over number 5. Ohio State or Baylor, Alabama or Florida State. The selection committee replaced the computers, but human judgment is still human judgment. Controversy is baked into the structure. Within a few years, the 4-team model was already considered too restrictive. Undefeated teams were left out. Conference champions were snubbed. Group of 5 schools were told, in effect, that the door was open, but the room was full. The sport that had spent 80 years trying to narrow the field of contenders was now being told it needed to widen it. The playoff expanded to 12 teams in 2024, a move designed to finally silence the critics. But in reality, it just multiplied the friction. Every November, the discourse returns to a fever pitch of seeding arguments and what-if scenarios that look remarkably similar to the ones Parke Davis was scribbling down in 1930. Because after 150 years, we have to admit a difficult truth. The chaos isn't a bug in the system. It is the system. The lack of clarity exactly what makes this sport's history so rich, so frustrating, and so human. We don't just love the games, we love the grievances. We love the feeling that our team was cheated by a system that was never designed to be fair. Earlier, when I mentioned the playoff committee, they're just a bunch of guys sitting in a room making up rankings. And then we get to pretend that we've had a playoff and we've solved this ancient problem of who wins everything. The playoff gives us a trophy and a confetti shower every January, but it will never give us consensus. We are still a sport governed by popes and polls, by secret ballots and strength of schedule metrics that no 2 people can agree on. The championship may be mythical, but the debate is eternal. And somewhere in a small town in Pennsylvania, Slippery Rock is still waiting for their trophy. But wait, there's more. I realized after finishing editing this video that what I called the final movement isn't really the final movement at all. This year, 2025, the Big Ten talked about the structure for a 24-team playoff. The SEC brought up a 16-team playoff. Both conference commissioners talked about having guaranteed number of playoff teams. Fans and pundits screamed about whether or not the G5 teams, James Madison and Tulane, belonged in the playoffs, and some suggested the G5 should form its own playoff. It's clear that we've moved into a moment in college football history where everything is about money. You know, college football's always been somewhat about money. And we used to be able to pretend that it wasn't, that it was about the student athlete. But those pretenses are gone and the veneer has been removed. Academic critics existed throughout college football history, warning about the size and power the sport had over universities. Today, those critics are gone. Many fans talk about the death of college football because of the rise of the NIL dollars, how much athletes are being paid, and the transfer portal, which allows athletes to move whenever they want. But the viewership of the games remains higher than ever. There are a lot of suggestions from fans and pundits alike as to how to fix college football, and most of those proposals are roughly the same. Take the biggest teams, separate from the NCAA, form geographically arranged divisions of equal strength, equal payment, and voila, you have order from chaos and you've fixed college football. I've always found these suggestions somewhat bizarre because what you're talking about creating is the NFL. And if you want to watch football in a format like that, then why don't you just go watch the NFL instead of taking college football and making it the same as the other sport? I'm curious as to where you think all of this is going and where it will end up in the next 5 to 10 years. This is John Johnston with Hardcore College Football History. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts.